We will start this meeting in about 5 minutes time at the top of the hour, 12 midday Eastern Standard Time in Australia. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I see we've got about 52 on the call so far. I think there'll be a few more. We had, I think, in the region of 350 people who registered for this. And from all parts of the world. And we will have some people, and I notice we've got some people on from Southeast Asia, from Eastern Asia, from Korea, Japan, etc., as well as Australia and New Zealand. We may have some people joining us from North America, from the US and Canada as well. Welcome to the second 9 in 90 webinar session. This has been designed for the Australia-New Zealand time zone, Australia, New Zealand and Eastern Asian time zone. But as I indicated, there may be some from North America who are joining us as well. I would ask you to stay on mute unless until such time as we're taking questions. Then you can either call them in or you can chat them in on the chat line. And I should also point out that this webinar is being recorded. And before we get into it, we do have some poll questions, a couple of poll questions. We're not going to ask you what your vaccination status is or any of that sort of COVID-related stuff, but can we put up the first poll question? Which category best describes you and your business? You're inquiring about certification, currently undertaking initial certification, currently SQF certified, you're a certification body, consultant, trainer, auditor, or other. Please just indicate, this will be up for 60 seconds, and then we'll just take an indication, take a pulse on who we have in the audience. And we've got a second poll question coming up shortly. The results seem to be currently SQF certified and looking to update to edition 9. I should point out that that this is the second 9 and 90 webinar. We did run one in May. It's still available on SQFI.com as a recording, and this one will also be recorded. The reason for holding this one is because we realize that some of you have not yet become Edition 9 certified or looking to update. So hopefully we've got the right representation here. Umi, if you can just drop that off, please. No, thanks. And we will go to the second poll question. And while we're doing that, in the background, I've got the FMI SQFI antitrust statement. It's a requirement for every SQF presentation that we show this antitrust statement, which means that we will not allow any competitive discussions or anti-competitive discussions happening as part of this presentation. So those second poll question is, when is your next, for some of you it won't be applicable obviously, when is your next Edition 9 audit due? And for the majority seems to be recertification audits due in the next 3 months. And we'll just drop that off. I realize you're all busily reading the antitrust statement. Well, you can't see it actually, it's behind the poll questions, isn't it? So we'll drop that off and we'll take a result of that polling. Thanks, Umi. And for most of you, some of you got no audit scheduled yet, 13 of you. Some of you already had your initial certification audit. We've noticed with the Edition 9 audits, there's quite a few initial certifications, including in this part of the world, which is good to see. And some of you have already had your certification audit. Okay, I mean, if we can drop that one off now, thanks. Just want to identify, yeah, if we can we take that result off the screen? Thanks, Umi. Or do I need to do it from here? Just to introduce you to the SQF team, because it's not just myself. Apparently, I'm the one with the big head, which is why that's on there like that. But Leanne Chuboff is the Vice President of Technical Affairs, who would be on this call, but it's late in the evening in the US, and we wanted to time it particularly for the Australian-New Zealand market. Christy Grzywinski, who is responsible for the training programs and the training outputs from SQF, and Tammy Van Buren. And the numbers that we'll show you during this presentation and some of the other slides, came from our compliance manager, Tammy Van Buren, who some of you would have seen in webinars as well. Third, a poll question for now, just to give us an indication of which codes you are interested in. Can we put up the third poll question? Thanks. Are you in primary animal production, primary plant production? You may be in more than one of those, but if you can indicate the one that features most, and that sort of reflects where we're at with our current certifications anyway. Food manufacturing, some of you in primary plant, one of you in agriculture, good. A couple in manufacture of animal products, pet food, dietary supplements. Well, we'll talk a little bit about dietary supplements as we go. Just give you, there's 73 now listed on the in the attendees, so we'll just give you a few more minutes to complete that, a few more seconds, sorry, to complete that, and then we'll take it down. So food manufacturing, definitely, but we have a few. That's good because we'll be focusing mainly on food manufacturing and some of the issues, the frequently asked questions we've got from food manufacturing mainly, but we will touch on primary plant production as well. So thank you for that. And I am going to just introduce the team that's on the call today. Myself, obviously, I'm I was going to say technical director. I'm the Asia Pacific representative. Joining me and will be taking you through the first part of the presentation is Ronnie Gurung, who's one of our SQF registered trainers and has, in fact, just completed an SQF training course this week. And in the background, asking the poll questions and making sure that everything's okay on Zoom is Umi Asawala, who is the customer service rep based here in Sydney. All three of us here are based in Sydney. So I'm going to hand over to Ronnie now to take you through the first part of the presentation. Ronnie, are you there? Can't hear you.
Thank you, Bill. And hi, everyone, and welcome to this webinar, wherever you are joining us from. So I'm going to take you through the structural changes to the code and also give you an update on the outcomes of the audits conducted to Edition 9 so far. So if you look at this slide that I'm presenting here, this gives you the new look and feel of Edition 9 standard. Those of you who've had a chance to have a look at the standard, you'd find that the standard is much more streamlined now. There has been a lot of consolidation of elements and a lot of reduction in the number of sections, and number of elements have also been reduced, and without impacting on the integrity or the requirement of the standard. This reduction was done by consolidating some of the elements and also reducing any duplication that was there in Edition 8.1. Now, the key information on this slide is the implementation date of Edition 9, which was the 24th of May, 2021. So all audits since the 24th of May, 2021 would be to Edition 9, except for those companies that were certified to 8.1 and had received a C grade, and they were due for the surveillance audit. So all surveillance audit to 8.1 would still be to 8.1 till that changes, and all other audits going forward is to the Edition 9 of the standard. So just on the slide, you can see the key changes to structure. If you look at the SQF Food Safety Code for manufacturing and primary production, this on the left-hand side, you've got Edition 8.1, and on the right-hand side, you've got Edition 9. So in Edition 8.1, you had one SQF code for manufacturing. There's one standalone standard, which covered animal product manufacturing, food manufacturing, pet food, and it covered your animal feed manufacturing. So that has changed now. So the manufacturing code has been split up into 5 separate codes. So you have a separate code for animal product manufacturing. Food manufacturing is separate on its own. and a new code for dietary supplements. So dietary supplements was covered under manufacturing previously. So now it's a completely new code on its own. So that's dietary supplements with the food sector category 31. And pet food is a completely separate code, and animal feed is another separate code. So you've got 5 separate codes out of the one manufacturing code. So that's it makes it much easier to navigate the standards. So if you look at the food manufacturing code, you have part A, you have systems element, and straight after that, you have the GMP module 11, which applies to the food manufacturing code. Likewise for the other codes. It's much easier to go through the standard, look at the specific requirements that is relevant for your business. The primary production standard has also been split up into 3 separate codes. So you've got primary animal production, primary plant production, and aquaculture. So 3 different codes again, with its respective food sector categories. I'll just come to that in a short while. And then you have got the storage and distribution, which hasn't changed. It was a standalone code previously in 8.1. It's still one code with food sector category 26. And you've got food packaging with food sector category 27. The quality code was a standalone code in 8.1. It's still a standalone code. And I'll talk about some of the key changes to quality code in another few slides from now. Then the food retail, food service, and fundamentals really haven't changed. So they are still the same. So if you look at the primary production codes, you have got primary animal production, primary plant production, and aquaculture, and with its respective food sector categories. For the primary plant production code, you've got food sector category 2, which is completely a new food sector category, which is indoor growing and harvesting of fresh produce and sprouted seed crops. So if you're doing any activities that aligns with this particular food sector category, you might want to look at your food sector category that's been assigned to you now to see, has it changed? So there's a new food sector category there, that's food sector category 2. Fresh produce and nuts pack house operation, which is food sector category 4, was previously in the manufacturing code. So now that's under the primary plant production code. And then you've got food sector category 6 for aquaculture, which is harvest and intensive farming of seafood. Just moving on. The food safety code for manufacturing has got its own codes, own food sector categories, So you've got dairy food processing, and all these were there under the manufacturing code previously, so that they're now relevant only to the food manufacturing code. Some of the food sector categories have been removed from the manufacturing and has been aligned to the other respective codes. So if you look at the animal product, food safety code for manufacture of animal products, food sector category 7 and food sector category 8 applies to the animal product food safety code. And the food safety code for manufacture of dietary supplements, which is a completely new code, the food sector category the relevant food sector category is 31, which is the manufacture of dietary supplements. And the dietary supplements will include vitamins, probiotics, natural health products, protein blends, and label supplements. In many countries, the dietary supplements could be covered by food legislation, but in some countries, the dietary supplements would have perhaps a food legislation, also other legislation like the Therapeutic Goods Administration. So it's important to look at what other legislations applies to dietary supplements in the country of manufacture and the country of sale of the product. Then you had a food safety code for manufacture of pet food, which has been separated out and with its food sector category 32. Then you have the animal feed, the manufacture of animal feed, which is food sector category 33. What this has also allowed with this change in the code, this has also allowed for customizing the requirements relevant to this industry sector. So we can previously pet food, animal feed was all under the manufacturing code, but now it's a separate code on its own. So you also have specific requirements that's been sort of reviewed and fine-tuned to make it relevant for that industry sector. So pet food, you'll have more specific requirements relevant to pet food. Animal feed, you'll have more additional requirements as specific and relevant to animal feed, and also language that is relevant to that particular foods sector category. So these are some of the changes. And you also have with the storage and distribution, food safety code for storage and distribution, that hasn't really changed because it was a standalone code previously. And the food sector category was same, storage and distribution, which is food sector category 26. I'd just like to highlight here that the food safety code for storage and distribution is relevant for those companies that are in the business of storage and distribution, so that actually do DC activities, transport, warehousing activities. It's not applicable for businesses that are manufacturing and have a site warehouse within the manufacturing site or located close by. That would still be the food manufacturing code or the other relevant manufacturing code for that industry sector. So this is for companies that are into storage and distribution. Sorry, it takes a while for the slide to shift. Now you have the, going back here again, you have the quality code. The quality code, the key change in the quality code has been that the dreaded word statistical has been removed. You still need to do process control. You still need to do data analysis and collect data to improve processes. But the word statistical has been removed because people feared the word statistical. You could still use statistical analysis tools to review and improve your processes. So that's one of the key changes in the quality code. It now applies to all GFSI recognized scheme. Just as a quick poll question there. So just wait for you to answer these questions. All right, the poll question was, are you interested in or currently certified to the SQF quality code? Well, quite a lot of people are currently certified to the SQF quality code, which is 52%. That's really good. And interested in certification to the SQF quality code, 9%, not applicable, 23%, and not interested is 8%. All right, so quite a significant number of companies still certified to the quality code, which is great. It's important to understand that quality code is an add-on to the food safety code, but sometimes your retailers and your customers might want you to also address the quality requirements, which can be done quite effectively by having the additional quality code. So it has its benefits. So it's obviously flexible for the companies to consider. The key changes with the quality code is that it gets now applicable to all GFSI recognized scheme. So if a company is currently certified to FSSC 22000, they can also be certified to quality code. They can choose to be certified to quality code. It's not just a GFSI recognized scheme, it's also other schemes, the non-GFSI recognized food safety scheme like ISO 22000. So if you have ISO 22000, or if your supplier has ISO 22000 and you are interested in them addressing quality aspects, you could ask them to have a look at the quality code and be certified to the quality code. So yeah, that's the quality code there for you. Before I just move ahead, there's one thing that I'd like to highlight. I think this has come up a lot in discussions that I have had with Bill, is that a lot of people are confused about what food sector category does apply to my business. Has it really changed with the change in code? The best place to look for that information is the Appendix 1 in your the respective code that's relevant to you. Look at Appendix 1 and look at your business activities under Appendix 1 and see which is the most relevant food safety code for you. And when you identify the food safety code, it will also identify for you which is the most relevant GMP module for your business. So if you're food manufacturing, the GMP module will be module 11 and also the most relevant food sector category. So it's really important that you are relook at your Appendix 1 to say, has a food sector category actually changed with the change of from edition 8.1 to edition 9? And if you are still conflicted and you're still not sure, speak to your certification body and clarify that you have actually identified the correct code or codes. Some of you might have 2 codes that's applicable to you and the correct food sector categories, because the auditors are assigned to your business based on the food sector categories, and you need to have the correct auditor coming out to audit your business. So can I emphasize it's really critical that you have a look at the Appendix 1 and understand that you are still, that the food sector category is the correct one that's been identified previously under 8.1. So moving on, so a brief outcome of the audit so far. So these are the number of audits that has been uploaded into the SQF assessment database, which is a repository track. So these are audits conducted up till the 13th of August. So this is to edition 9. So far, food safety audits, complete audits to edition 9 has been 986. This is up to the 13th of August. And 106 were initial, recertification 572, and unannounced audits were 308. And if you look at the countrywide divide, USA obviously has a chunk of the audits, 709. In Australia, so far, 99 audits have been conducted. The average score is 94.93, which is quite a high score there. This is for edition 9. So the previous score with edition 8.1 into 2020 was 94.73. So there hasn't been a big shift in the scoring system. If you look at the number of non-conformances that were raised so far, critical 0, not critical non-conformance so far, majors 76, and your minors were 4,596. So if you look at the total percentage of minors, this is about 98.3% of minor non-conformances are raised. Still quite a low number of major non-conformances have been raised so far. You might also realize, if you have had a look at the edition 9 standard, there has been a slight change in the number of points that would be deducted for major non-conformances. In 8.9, 10 points were deducted for major. Now 5 points are deducted for major. So which is really to encourage auditors to raise perhaps more major non-conformances if they're not doing that earlier. But we still don't have a big jump in the major non-conformities, but quite a significant amount of minor non-conformities. So this is just a breakup of the number of audits conducted per code. So food manufacturing, you have 56 audits have been conducted. This is an Australian data. So 99 audits in Australia so far, up to the 13th of August. So 56 for food manufacturing is the biggest number, then followed by your primary plant production and storage and distribution and the other standard. So the major non-conformances, so which were some of the key non-conformances that were raised? I'm just going to bring this down. Sorry. The slide tends to sometimes move a bit too slow.
Ronnie, do you want me to move them?
Yeah, no, it's because we're sharing the screen, it's moving a bit slow for me. All right, I'll let you move the slide now.
Okay.
Right, so if you look at the top 4 major non-conformances that are raised, cleaning and sanitation. Some of the major non-conformances have been around cleaning and sanitation. It's either because of missing pre-op checks not performed on all equipment, or it's not been done effectively, which is to say that the staff have not been trained properly. So competency of staff on cleaning. So pre-objects, which is the auditor has found some food safety risk at the time of the audit, which has sort of led to the major non-conformance on cleaning and sanitation. Internal audits and inspections. If you, those of you are familiar with the code, this is the manufacturing code. 254 is internal audits and inspection, and a non-conformance is raised that no internal audits were carried out, so which is a major non-conformance because of a system failure, and audits have not been conducted. This particular clause, it's important to remember, it covers internal audits and inspections. So there's requirement for inspections, which is separate part of the requirement, and also that companies need to have an effective internal audit system. These are two separate systems. So that's a non-conformance there. And what's also encouraging to see with the Edition 9 and the current audit outcomes is that a lot of focus has been placed by the auditors on the HACCP component of the food safety system, which is your food safety plan, part of the SQF system standard. And an increasing number of non-conformances are now being raised on that, which is the way it should be, because HACCP is really the backbone of your SQF system. So a non-conformance is raised on missing CCP monitoring, so it's not consistent or it's completely missing. A non-conformance raised that hazard analysis did not consider severity and likelihood to determine the significance of hazard. So there was no consideration of severity and likelihood. That's the major non-conformance that was raised. And the other one was on management responsibility, no evidence consideration to food safety culture, and several repeat non-conformances from previous audit. And this is it could be an issue with ineffective corrective actions, or the same non-conformances coming up. The companies have not done effective corrective actions. So these were the top 4 major non-conformances in different parts of the standard.
I've just moved it for you.
Thank you. Top 5 minor non-conformances. Again, cleaning and sanitation features in the minor non-conformance as well. Somehow the GMP there's sort of a gap in the effective implementation of the cleaning and sanitation program. So this seems to come up quite a lot. So evidence of ineffective cleaning, missing records, schedules not followed, or incomplete schedules. The other non-conformances, the other minor non-conformances are around a lot around the walls, floors, and ceilings, which seems to have always be a problem. So doors not sealed, ceilings and walls damaged. It's either because it's easy to notice these non-conformances, or there's a lack of compliance in the basic fundamental requirements, which are the GMP requirements, the good manufacturing requirements. So this has contributed to the huge number of minor non-conformances. Could I have the next slide, Bill? From the systems part of from the systems elements, if you look at this particular slide, you can see food safety culture performance not reviewed. Again, observations of employee practices did not provide evidence of an effective food safety culture. Policy statement does not include commitment to establish and maintain a food safety culture. There seems to be a theme here. There seems to be a few more non-conformances being raised on the fact that the companies have not really looked at the food safety culture and adopted the food safety culture requirement of the standard. So the standard now has a key requirement about food safety culture, and this has not been addressed. So if you look at the management review, the non-conformance was that the food safety culture performances are not being reviewed, which is a requirement of the management review agenda. And the other non-conformance was food safety objectives not being reviewed. Right now, this has been raised as a minor non-conformance, but going forward in future, this has the potential of becoming a major non-conformance because it's one of the salient requirement of the standard. Not established food safety objectives, condensate dripping from above food safety issues not reported to management. There's a management reporting requirement under the management responsibility clause, and also observation of employee practices did not provide evidence of an effective food safety culture. So the auditors are really honing down on whether the companies are embracing this new requirement of food safety cultures, and they're looking at and picking up things about employees' behaviors, and are they really reflecting that the organization has imparted food safety culture, has got a food safety culture plan in place, are they training staff effectively, Are they communicating to staff effectively about their responsibility towards food safety? So there's a lot of non-conformances around that food safety culture. And food defense, unlocked doors, which is again related to infrastructure issues of people not following systems correctly and leaving doors open. Then food safety culture, again, the requirement there. Crisis management planning, crisis management plan not tested and or reviewed. So many times organizations are really good at identifying what are the potential crises that could impact on our food safety system. And they are good at identifying them and documenting response plan. But what companies are not sometimes good at is really testing and challenging that response plan. So here it's the non-conformance is about crisis management plan not being tested or it's not reviewed. So that's so these are some of the top five. There are lots of other non-conformances. So if we thought to highlight some of the top 5 minor non-conformances, as you can see, quite a few of those around food safety culture. I think that's it from me now, Bill. I'll hand over to Bill, and Bill will take you through the rest of the changes.
Okay, thank you, Ronnie. You might wonder, by the way, why we went through the know your code, the food safety categories before. As Ronnie touched on, we've been getting a lot of inquiries from different sites, even certification bodies and auditors, on does this site have the right food safety categories? Do the food safety is the code applying to the right food safety categories? So we want you to make sure that you're familiar with and you know the appropriate food safety categories that apply, and therefore which food safety code will apply. I mean, for example, packing sheds used to be in manufacturing, now in plant products. A couple of other significant changes, particularly in the animal product manufacturing sector. Make sure you're familiar with them and you have an agreement with your certification bodies to audit and certify the correct code and the correct food safety categories. So just what I want to cover now is the most common frequently asked questions we've been receiving, excuse me, both through the customer service and the technical team in the US and here. It's not just what we're getting here, it's also what we've been getting through customer services in the US. And there's 8 that I want to touch on. After that, there's a few other follow-up items, just questions that we've had in the last few days. And then we will take your questions and see if we can answer your questions. And you can do that either by chat, or if you want to open your mics and discuss them, just make sure you're not cutting across someone else. But the 8 most common ones here are potable water recirculation, which is 11511. By the way, almost all of them, in fact, I think all of them here are in the manufacturing code. They may apply to other codes as well, but they're mainly from the manufacturing code. Potable water reticulation, which is mentioned in 1151. The unannounced audits, when will they resume? There's some confusion around unannounced audits. Food safety culture, obviously, Ronnie's already touched on that, but we'll talk about unannounced audits. Requirements for internal sampling and testing, which is covered in 2441 and 2442. What is meant by that and how do you cover it? And also proficiency testing, which is also mentioned in 2442. Composition to meet label claims has confused a few people in 2329. And also label reconciliation. Do people have to hand count every label? And the last one on the list here is ambient air testing. Is ambient air testing mandatory? So we'll cover some of those in a little bit more detail. And then there's a few others, excuse me, in the last slide that I want to cover off. And then, by the way, we're going to point you to where some of the resources are at SQFI.com. Some of our guidance documents, webinars, checklists, etc., summaries of changes that are on our SQF website, which are freely downloadable and available. once you go off on the website. So we'll cover some of that as we go through. The first one, 11511, potable water, and this is what it says in 11511. Adequate supplies of potable water drawn from a known clean source shall be provided, etc., etc. The source of potable water shall be identified, as well as on-site storage if applicable, and reticulation within the facility. And reticulation seems to be the word that has confused quite a few people. Apparently in some countries, the word reticulation is not commonly used. What it means is a network of pipes used in irrigation and water supply. So in water supply within a facility, the network of pipes for potable water need to be clearly identified and differentiated from any grey water, wastewater, or non-potable water sources. So that's simply all it means, is identification of the potable water sources within the facility and the network of pipes that are used to distribute potable water within the facility. So hopefully that one's pretty clear. Unannounced audits has caused a little bit of confusion because, as most of you would be aware, in 2020, because of the COVID limitations, COVID restrictions, we limited and, in fact, basically put unannounced audits on sabbatical. So it is assumed by a lot of clients and certification bodies that they are due for an unannounced audit this year. The requirement now in edition 9 has changed slightly. It's in Part A 11.4 in all the SQF food safety codes, and it says that the certification body is required to conduct an unannounced audit of your site once every 3 years. Your first 3-year cycle commences with your initial certification audit date. What that means is within the first, let me continue. Within the first 3 years of certification, you're required to have one unannounced audit. So what that means in effect is even if your unannounced audit was postponed last year, you're basically starting again with edition 9. So sometime in the next 3 years, you're required to have an unannounced audit. And then thereafter, an unannounced audit, it's hard to say at this time of day, every 3 years. So hopefully that clarifies it. Check it with your certification body if you're in any doubt, but basically edition 9 allows you to start again in terms of your unannounced audit cycle. Any questions on that, and we'll take them in the chat later on. Food safety culture is obviously the area which has, is the area that's caused most questions coming into us. And the questions are generally around what will the auditor look for? Because it's not black and white, it's not binary, it's not a case of either you've got it or you haven't got it. Now, a couple of points I want to make here. This is obviously the section out of management responsibility. It's mentioned in 2111 as well under the policy statement that should mention food safety culture, but this is really the element that requires food safety culture within the organization. 2 points I want to make here. You'll notice the asterisk after the title. That indicates that there's a guidance document available for food safety culture. And as I indicated before, at the end of this presentation, we'll show you how to access those guidance documents, including the one on food safety culture. Secondly, almost all the points raised, the bullet points raised in this particular section are not new. The establishment of food safety objective, adequate resources, food safety practices, staff are informed, etc., we're all within edition 8.1, so they're not new. The only bullet point that is new there is that staff are empowered to act to resolve food safety issues within their scope of work. So it's not simply a case of do they have food safety culture or don't they? It's not a black and white. It's not, as I said, it's not binary. It's not you've got it or you haven't got it. Sites are moving towards improving their food safety culture. The starting point is a recognition that it has to be in place, and the plan in place to do something about it. So whether it's surveys, whether it's performance measures, whether it's feedback from the employees within the site saying that something needs to be done, a plan needs to be put in place. And what the auditor is looking for is that you are working towards that plan within the time set, the time that's set, and that you are doing something about it. You're actually working on the requirements. Now, we have indicated in the guidance document some records, interviews, observations that auditors may be looking for. It's not a comprehensive list. It's not exclusive. Some sites may have these, some sites may not. It's not a case of, yes, we have to follow these records, interviews, and observations, but it is a guide to saying, well, if you've got you need to have food safety objectives and performance records for performance measures. There should be records somewhere of that. There's an organizational chart. There could be a capital project plan. There are internal audit reports. Ronnie touched on that before. Internal audits is something that is not done very well within the SQF program. One of the requirements that we've introduced in Edition 9 is to separate out internal audits from daily inspections, housekeeping inspections, because the internal audit, the full internal audit of the SQF program is required on an annual basis. Housekeeping, the inspection audit reports need to be included as well. It could be recognition programs for employees, positive reinforcement programs for employees. There could be disciplinary processes, but we're looking at a much more positive, creating a much more positive attitude and behavior rather than just punitive resources in place. Food safety and quality records, training records that operators are trained not just in food safety culture, but in their roles, in their jobs, and how to positively contribute to their roles within the organization, and job descriptions as well. And again, the interviews are not comprehensive or conclusive. They're just some suggestions that you might need to look at. Are you meeting your food safety objectives with management, with the practitioner? How do you know? Do you have food safety objectives? And how do you know that you're meeting them? How do you know that you're performing against your performance measures? Do you ever need help to get anything done? Employees, obviously. Do you need assistance? Do you know what your role is? Do you know what happens before and after? Do you have any control or authority or empowerment to act within your role? Would you feel safe feeding your product to your family? Standard response. What happens if someone violates a food safety procedure? Is it just punitive? Is it training? Is it education? Is it relocation? What is the procedure in place? And explain a time when you told management about a food safety issue and what was the response. Again, an interview with an operator, with an employee. Are they able? Are they encouraged to raise issues that they see, food safety issues that they see? When you look at food safety culture, don't consider it as culture, consider it as behaviors. What you're trying to do is influence and improve the behaviors on food safety within the organization. Some of the observations you may be raising: is the company transparent with its food safety performance measures, with its objectives and measures? Do people appear rushed? Do the people appear controlled? Do people appear that they know, this is employees, operators, appear that they know what their responsibility, their role and responsibility is? Are they completing tasks above the minimum requirements? Well, do they know what the requirements are and how much authority or autonomy they have within their role? Do employees seem hesitant to answer questions? That can be a literally cultural issue. I understand that, but are they confident in their responsibilities within the facility? Do you see personnel pick up trash off the floor, or do they walk by it? Do they help other people? Do they assist? Do they have the authority and the flexibility to do that? So it's not ideal. It's not, and it's going to be very much specific to the site, to the facility, to the management process within there. What the auditor is looking for is that you do have a plan, that plan is communicated, people understand it, you have objectives and performance measures, and that you're working towards it. And as I said, there's more information available online in not only our guidance document, but there's also a webinar in there on food safety culture. In-house laboratory testing is another area which is causing a little bit of concern and confusion. This is in 2442, where internal laboratories are used to conduct input, environmental or product analysis, sampling and testing methods shall be in accordance with the applicable requirements of ISO 17025. And some of the questions that we get is, does my internal laboratory need to be certified to ISO 17025? And what tests are included, in this requirement? And again, we do have a guidance document, which I'm just going to have a quick look for here because I want to refer to it. The requirement on external laboratories is that they are accredited to ISO 17025. So anytime you send out products or samples for analysis, for testing and for analysis, that laboratory needs to be ISO 17025 accredited. And by the way, your tests need to be included in their scope of accreditation. Internal laboratories, the requirement is not for accreditation. Internal laboratories, that's laboratories that you have on site within the facility, do not need to be certified to ISO 17025. But the requirement is that they shall be in accordance with. And then, by the way, that's not just our wording, it's the wording that GFSI has in terms of internal laboratories. And therefore, we've had to include it in the requirements. Now, what that means is the requirement applies to the food safety tests conducted in-house. Whatever food safety tests, not other tests, not quality tests or any other tests, but any food safety tests that are part of your food safety program that are conducted in-house, the requirement applies to them. The site does not need to be accredited to ISO 17025 because SQF aligns with the requirements of 17025. And if you look at the guidance document, and I hope you do, if you are concerned about this particular issue, that you get a copy of the guidance document. On page 2, there's a table of the SQF code requirements and how the code applies to ISO 17025. So it's covered in 2112, 2113, 223, 2328, 2441, 2442, etc. Number of different elements of the SQF program apply to are in accordance with the applicable requirements of ISO 17025. So it's clearly laid out there, and I suggest that anyone who is, as I said, concerned about that particular issue, please download that, and then if you have any other questions, then please contact a member of the technical team. Tests included are the tests that you need to confirm compliance to specifications for raw materials and process testing, in process production or finished product testing. Included in that element is a requirement for proficiency testing. And we also have, strangely enough, a guidance document on proficiency testing. Proficiency testing is done, we get a number of inquiries on this as well. Proficiency testing is done via interlaboratory comparison to calibrate the performance of laboratory personnel and in-process testers. Those who conduct the microbiological, chemical, and physical analysis on your materials, your work in process, your finished products, and the processing environment. I'm just going to look this up because I'm sure it says that proficiency testing must be done annually. Including annual proficiency testing for staff conducting analysis. is required. It's not training. Proficiency testing is not training. Maybe training comes out of proficiency testing, but it is calibration against another approved laboratory. And by approved laboratory, we're talking primarily ISO 17025 accredited laboratories, or the suppliers of laboratory equipment will very often do proficiency testing as well. So it's calibration. It is inter-laboratory comparison of the methods that are used and the results of that testing. It is not for anything else. Our requirement is not for anything else other than food safety testing of the product or environmental testing, and is conducted for all testing that is completed by your internal laboratories on site. So again, please look at the guidance document if you have any more information requirements. There is a guidance on the back there, basically the process, selection of the external laboratory, the handling and testing of the materials. And again, most ISO 17025 laboratories, you can Google them, you can look them up on the website to find appropriate ISO 17025 accredited laboratories that do proficiency testing. Here in Australia, there is a NATA methodology for proficiency testing. Make sure you identify the testing that is required to be compared, to calibrate it against the external laboratories and go for that. So selection of the external laboratory, handling and testing of the materials, how you go through about handling and testing the materials for proficiency testing, a submission of the test results, and then review of summary reports, and if necessary, corrective action coming out of that. So that's proficiency testing. Next one is inquiries we get about in 2329, subclause in 2329, a composition to meet label claims. And we're going to touch on labels in the next few slides as well. But what I want to cover off here is just composition to meet label claims. This is to ensure that there is, this is under finished product specifications. And it's to ensure that there is complete alignment between the label description and the contents of the package or the product. Now we know that the contents of the package, the product, has got to meet regulatory requirements, but the ingredient listing and the label must also match the contents. So in other words, there should be nothing included in the contents that is not accurately reflected in the content list. And the nutritional information panel, or the ingredient listing, whatever you call it in different countries. We call it the NIP, nutritional information panel, must accurately reflect the nutritional values of the contents. In other words, what it says on the outside of the pack must reflect what is inside the package. And that includes any particular label claims you're making about, reduces cholesterol or whatever, that has to meet regulatory requirements, the labeling requirements under the legislation in this country, but must also reflect what is in the in the package. That's all that means. Composition to meet label claims is what is inside the package is reflected on the label on the outside of the package. Reconciliation of labels, however, has caused a little bit more concern. By the way, there's no guidance document on this yet, but there will be a guidance document coming in the next couple of weeks. Before the end of this month, we will have a guidance document on reconciliation of labels. Under 2612, what we say there is that procedures shall be implemented to ensure that label use is reconciled and any inconsistencies investigated and resolved. And we get, do I have to hand count every label? What does label reconciliation mean, etc., etc. Now, as I said, guidance document is coming out on this, but really the way you reconcile and by the way, what is reconciliation? Reconciliation in terms of inventory is making sure that what you have in stock reflects what has been used or has been purchased in some cases. In other words, your physical stock relates to what your paper stock is. Bad choice of word, paper stock, but you know what I mean. Your theoretical stock and your physical stock are aligned. Now, how you go about doing that is your method, because it's going to depend on label size, label type, volume, the speed of use. So you're putting through, 1,000 small labels per minute, or is it, 1 or 2 labels per hour? So it's going to very much depend on the type of label used and the, as I said, the size, volume, and speed of use. We are not prescribing what your methodology is. What we're saying is if there is, when you do a stock take, if there is any consistency between what is being used and what you should have used, then you are checking it. Demonstrate that your method will identify any inconsistencies. And by the way, this particular element also relates to other elements and labels, which I'll come to shortly. So you need to consider them all in context. So demonstrate that your method will identify inconsistencies and determine how you resolve the inconsistencies and show proof through your records. And one of the reasons for focusing so much on labels and the accuracy of labels, the application of labels in edition 9 is because we get a lot of complaints and recalls with the wrong product on the wrong package. Some of them are related to allergens, and that's in 281. You'll see it in 2819 here at the bottom. But it's not just allergens. Sometimes it's just not allergen related, but the wrong product in the wrong package, which causes immense cost for manufacturers, and it causes a recall or withdrawal from an SQF perspective as well. So there's a number of areas where labels are referred to now within the SQF code. Some of them are not new, but some of them have been added or embellished. In 2327, finished product label should be accurate, comply, and approved. That's not new. It was just changed from a different element number. In 2612, startup changeovers shall be documented and implemented. And that relates back to label reconciliation. Startup and changeovers of label or product shall be documented and implemented and authorized. They're approved by an authorized person, and ensure the correct product is in the correct package with the correct label. That's where the reconciliation comes. What is also new, that was new, not new. What is new is ensure that label use is reconciled, any inconsistencies investigated, and maintain records, so that if you do discover there's inconsistencies between the label use and your stock of labels, then those inconsistencies are investigated and resolved and may prevent a recall or withdrawal. Oops, sorry, didn't mean to do that. A recall or withdrawal if you discover that there is a significant variation. And again, in 2819, which is in allergens, allergen management, finished product labels must be accurate and true with regard to allergens, depending on the regulations in that particular country. So label reconciliation is dependent on the type of product labels you have. The methodology is entirely up to you, as long as it identifies inconsistencies in label use. Ambient air testing, another area where we get a number of questions, particularly is why do we need to do ambient air testing? 11712 talks about ambient air in high-risk areas shall be tested at least annually to confirm that it does not pose a risk to food safety. Now, first of all, we have a definition in the glossary for high-risk areas, and that's it listed there. A segregated room or area where high-risk food processes are performed and which require a higher level of hygienic practice to prevent contamination of high-risk food by pathogenic organisms. We do not have a definition for high care areas, as some other standards do, but we talk about high-risk food processes in high-risk areas. And so if you refer that back to 11712, ambient air in high-risk areas shall be tested at least annually to confirm that it does not pose a risk to food safety. Why? Because high-risk areas require a higher level of hygienic practice, and air in food product facilities is a vector of contamination moving from one place to another. Contaminants can be dispersed by aerosol consisting of solid dust or liquid, water condensation, microscopic particles. These particles may carry microorganisms, which are referred to as bioaerosols, such as pathogenic bacteria or fungi, or even viruses, spore, or allergenic substances. So really, you have to define, is it a high-risk process? Is it a high-risk area? What is the risk of microbial contamination, airborne contamination within that facility? Particles, according to the research, particles of 5 to 20 microns can be suspended in the air. Anything over that will tend to settle, settle as dust particles, but again, can still be an environmental contaminant. And there are two methods of ambient air testing: microbial air sampling or total suspended particulate matter. And again, we have a guidance document on the on SQFI.com that goes into that in quite a bit detail and covers the research. So there is a guidance document on ambient air testing. Now, do you have to do it? Is it compulsory? Well, something I want to refer to, and it applies to all GAP and GMP requirements. So it applies to everything outside the system elements. All the GAP, GMP requirements, Module 11, Module 7 in primary production. Obviously, the wording is slightly different, but this is the one out of the Food Manufacturing Code, 2421, and it's not used enough because the GAP, GMP modules are risk-based. The site shall ensure that the applicable good manufacturing practices described, in this case in Module 11 of this Food Safety Code, are documented and implemented or exempted according to a written risk analysis outlining the justification for exemption. That's one. Or evidence of the effectiveness of alternative control measures to ensure that food safety is not compromised. It's not a get out of jail card. It's an opportunity for sites to say, we don't do that, we don't need it. And here's a risk analysis to show why we don't need it. That's point one. Or we don't do it that way, we do it this way. And we can demonstrate that the control measures we have in place do not compromise food safety. That applies to not just to ambient air testing, it applies to every aspect of Module 11 in the Food Manufacturing Code or to the other GAP, GDP, GMP modules in the other codes. So very often we see Module 11 being taken literally. This is the way we have to do it. It's not always the case if the site can justify its exemption according to a written risk analysis. So in the case of ambient air testing, is it needed? We can demonstrate that it's not needed because, I'm not going to write it for you, A, B, C, or D. Or we don't do it that way, we do it this way. We actually check ambient air testing on a monthly basis, or we have got a totally sealed environment here and we don't need ambient air testing. Whatever the case may be, these risk analysis or alternative control measures need to be documented and should be available for the certification body and the auditor prior to the audit, so that you don't waste time in that. The auditor can look at something else rather than looking at the particular element. So something you should bear in mind when you're looking at all the GAP, GMP modules. Just some other issues that have come up recently, and we've added them in here. Substitute SQF practitioner 2.1.1.4. Yes, they are required, unfortunately. we do ask that there is a substitute SQF practitioner for every site. And for some reason, I've lost a page. And it's only the substitute practitioner needs to have the same qualifications. That's understood, but is only required to fill in for the SQF practitioner on planned absences. So where the SQF practitioner is known to be on leave or long service leave or whatever, that the substitute SQF practitioner is there and available to take over. We're also getting questions on refresher HACCP training. You know, when do we need to have refresher HACCP training? There is no requirement within SQF for refresher HACCP training. There are in other codes, and we understand that some of the retailers require refresher HACCP training, but SQF does not require refresher HACCP training. Doesn't matter when you did your HACCP training, it applies. Drinking water can, by the way, we want to make sure that you're competent at HACCP, and one of the issues that keeps on coming up is that we're getting people who have had HACCP training and issued HACCP certificates when they really don't have a science background. They don't have a food science, food technology background, don't understand microbial pathogens, etc. And they're undertaking HACCP training and getting HACCP certificates. So we do require that people are competent in HACCP as a result of training, but there's no specific requirement for refresher training. Drinking water containers are allowed in the 11412 as long as they're enclosed. And they are sealed and properly used and stored correctly. We have a question of whether we're talking about open drinking water containers or closed ones. If they're complete, if they're finished, if they're used, then they should be trashed in the appropriate containers, but we do allow for enclosed drinking water containers. Hand washing stations is one of the requirements where you need to consider alternative means, because many sites we know have hot air dryers for drying hands, and we require in 11323 we require single-use paper towels. So there's an opportunity for sites to say, well, we can justify the use of high-speed air dryers because of A, B, C, or D, or because we use gloved hands, whatever the case may be. The other requirement, by the way, in there is for stainless steel or equivalent sinks, but you will notice in the other food safety codes that it's not as rigorous as it is in 11323. So the manufacturing codes have the requirement for single-use paper towels, stainless steel sinks, but for example, in module 10 in pack houses, it's not quite as rigorous, and alternative methods of drying are permitted. But again, with any of the requirements in module 11, if you can justify alternative means or exemption, then you need to document that, and you need to do a risk analysis, and you may get it approved. I already mentioned high risk, high care. We define high risk, but not high care. Irrigation water, this is the only one out of primary that has come up recently, and it concerns the hazards associated with irrigation water. Just look it up quickly, 7621. So hazards and risks associated with irrigation water including type, sources, storage, proximity to CAFOs, that's concentrated animal feeding operations, untreated soil amendments. So it's a protection. The intent there is a protection of irrigation water from sources of contamination or from hazards. And the last one on that list is metal detection, which is in 11743, and the requirement there is that metal detectors and other foreign body, foreign object devices are monitored, validated, and verified to ensure their ongoing effectiveness. Now we will get to your questions. But before we do that, let me just touch on the resources. I've mentioned the resources. If you go into SQFI.com, if you Google, and it should all be on your favorites on your website. If you Google or click on SQFI.com, you will find on the front page, on the home page, if you just drop down the home page, you will get to the Edition 9 resources. And it includes webinars, checklists, code change documents, guidance documents. In addition to that, we also have newsletters. We have a monthly newsletter for Australia and New Zealand, specifically for Australia and New Zealand. And we've mentioned in here SQF Unites, which is the conference that is running in the US in October this year, which unfortunately no one from this hemisphere is able to attend for obvious reasons. As a result of that, I can announce that we will be having a webinar, a full-day webinar in this hemisphere in early November, date still to be finalized, to cover and it'll be a complimentary webinar, which will, 4 hours in the morning in English and 3 hours in the afternoon in Japanese and Chinese, which will cover the requirements, the conference requirements for this part of the world. But before we get to that, just to complete the resources, I mentioned some of those guidance documents. There's more coming. All our Edition 9 guidance is topic specific now. Ambient air testing, approved supplier program, etc., all the way down through there. I've already mentioned some of them: food safety culture, product sampling, inspection, analysis, if you're concerned about that particular area, proficiency testing, root cause analysis, by the way, which is an area that we are increasingly concerned about. Practitioner and substitute practitioner covered, I covered as well. And we are increasing the number of guidance documents as we go. So you won't get a guidance document specifically in food manufacturing or on primary plant products. They're all topic specific guidance documents. And just before we finish webinars, we also have a number of webinars on that same link, going to the Edition 9 resources. Some we have partnered with certification bodies and other stakeholders. And also top right there, we have a micro webinar series of 10 to 15 minutes on remote audit activities, in-house lab requirements, quality code changes, and food safety culture. And there's a number also on our YouTube sites. And lastly, again, on that same link in the Edition 9 resources, we have a summary of changes for most of the codes from Edition 8.1 to Edition 9, particularly food manufacturing, primary plant products, food packaging, storage and distribution, and quality. And we also have checklists available for all the new standards. This is downloadable checklists, which are freely available, which are there for you to be able to do your own internal audits before external audits. They can't be used by auditors in conducting certification audits because they need to come out of ReposiTrak, but they are available for sites who want to do gap audits or internal audits prior to getting to their certification audits. Now, we want the opportunity to take your questions as well. So do we have any questions that you want to chat in? We've got about 15 minutes.
There's a question from a participant, Bill, regarding ambient air quality.
Yeah. How come I'm not saying that? Oh, it helps if I go to chat, doesn't it? There you go. Do we need a backup plan for potable water? We're a manufacturing site in Melbourne. If there is a risk, you need to maintain a potable water supply. So if there is a risk of failure of your potable water sources and facilities, then yes, you would need a backup plan or a contingency plan to say, what do you do in that situation? Where do you get your water from? Because you need to be using that potable water within your facility. So if there is a risk, if you're on a municipal water supply, the risk is probably fairly minimal. But if there is a risk of continued supply of potable water, then I'm surprised if you do have a risk in a manufacturing site in Melbourne. But if there is a risk, then yes, you need a contingency plan or a backup plan, or you are stopping production. Are they meaning ambient as such? Is uncontrolled air temperature by ambient air. It's the air within that particular room, within that particular facility. Actually, it may be slightly refrigerated or it may be air controlled, but if it's in normal, comfortable temperatures, then air sampling and monitoring is required unless you can justify otherwise. Ambient air testing is required unless you can justify otherwise.
Local air quality.
Anything else? Any other people want to chat in questions? And by the way, any questions we can't answer, we will get back to you on. Any other questions? We have one. Do you have to submit risk assessments if you don't think a section is applicable to SQF for approval? C. Williams is the person who asked the question. You're in primary plant production. You are better to submit the risk assessments. We don't require, but we encourage risk assessments to be given to the certification body and approved by the certification body prior to the audit. And I'll explain the reasons for that. We've got two terms that we use within SQF as far as audits. One is exempt and the other is not applicable. Auditors will not mark anything as exempt because it means that there's been a documented risk assessment submitted and approved by the certification body beforehand. So let me give you an example. I mean, doesn't apply to you, but in a manufacturing, we've got a section in Module 11 on refrigeration. The manufacturing site may not have any refrigeration, so they put in a risk assessment or documentation to the certification body saying, we don't have any refrigeration on site. We don't need refrigeration, we've got ambient products. Simple risk analysis. There's no risk, we don't need it. The certification body approves that, and therefore they tell the auditor, you can mark that as not applicable. If that doesn't happen, the auditor goes on site and says, well, there's no cold storage here, there's no refrigeration. The auditor will mark it as not applicable. Now, in the case of a risk assessment for to exclude something, to exempt something from your audit, yes, it does need to be beforehand. If it's a risk assessment to justify an alternative method of control, it is better to submit it beforehand because that gives the certification body and the auditor a chance to look at it up front and to decide whether it's going to be acceptable or not. So in both cases, cut a long story short, let me conclude by saying, yes, you should submit them both to the certification body in advance, so the auditor is available. By the way, submitting to the certification body may be direct to the CB, or it may be through your auditor if you know who your auditor is. Any other questions? No other questions? Don't tell me we're done already. We got so many more questions in the first one. Potable water supplied by Southeast Water Melbourne and outsourcing may cause further risk. Well, look, I'm not going to second guess the auditor, but if there's no production and therefore there is no risk to product as a result of alternative sources of water, then arguably the auditor may accept that. But again, I'm not there, I'm not on the site, I'm not going to second guess the auditor. But you do need, if you do feel that there's a threat to your water source, then there does need to be either an alternative source of water, of potable water that is, or the source of water treatment, or there's a contingency plan to be able to deal with that. And ceasing production obviously would be one of the options with a contingency plan. Do we have anything else? Don't tell me I've covered everything. No one will believe it. Any other questions? If there are no other questions, we might take less than 90 minutes. Wouldn't that be a first? Usually we go over. So last calls, last chance for any questions. And by the way, obviously, if you've got any questions at any other time, you don't have Roddy's email address, but you do have my email address and Umi's email address. And by the way, if you've got any issues, any customer service issues in terms of audit reporting, etc., then Umi's your point of contact. It's umi@sqfi.com. And I'm B. McBride at SQFI.com. So please contact us if you've got any other questions. If not, I'll just give you last calls. And if we don't have anything else. Oh, oh dear. Some examples, please. Casual and seasonal staff are obviously concerned. So are contract staff, where some sites are bringing in contract staff on an infrequent basis. And it, again, who's it, Jean? Jean, it really depends on the proportion you have of casual and seasonal staff to your overall staff within the facility. But you can also have processes in place. They need to be adequately trained, whether that's offsite or on-site, whether they're casual or seasonal. If they're just coming in for a season, are they given adequate training in your requirements when they join the workforce for that season? If they're casual and they're just coming in on a infrequent basis, then again, they need to be given appropriate training in what your requirements are. And your requirements, including your expectations on their responsibilities, their roles, and their behavior on food safety. If it's your edict that people will take responsibility for their own workplaces and their own activities, then that needs to be stressed with them, with the pros and cons, with the, we will give you this much autonomy, but this is what happens if you don't meet the requirements. So yeah, look, any casual or seasonal staff that comes on site does need to be adequately trained. You can't just assume that Joe was here for last season, so he's going to come back for this season. I'll come to that in a minute. Is going to come back this season. You must assume that everyone's starting again, and there needs to be a training program and a monitoring and supervision program. It's not just a case of giving them an induction training when they first come in the door and then just leaving them. There's a supervision, there's a monitoring program to make sure that they are following your requirements on site. What does the site need to show for reticulation of water? Is the original building plan sufficient? Plus identification of water lines within the facility. Yes, on the building plans, yes, but whatever lines, and you may have multiple service lines. You may have CO2, air, oxygen, non-potable water, potable water, all in the same bank of lines within the facility. The potable water lines need to be clearly identified, color-coded, labeled, whatever the case may be within the facility. Luantia, hi Luantia, is the status of the SQF quality code still not GFSI benchmark? No, it never will be. It can't be, because GFSI does not cover anything does not benchmark anything other than food safety management systems. So all our food safety codes are GFSI benchmarked, and we're currently going through the process with almost completed the process of updating that benchmarking to edition 9. It's a long process, it's 9 months, but the quality code can never be benchmarked to GFSI. Any other questions? No, no more questions. Well, I do thank you for your questions. I'd also like to thank Ronnie for her participation today, and to Umi for the poll questions and for making sure that the Zoom production happened effectively. So thanks both to the team. And if any of you have any questions at any time, please contact, if you're on the other side of the pond, please contact, that's the big pond, please contact the technical team or customer services in the US. If you're here, then please contact either Umi or myself if it's a technical matter, and we will either respond to you or try and get it resolved with the rest of the technical team. So thank you for your time, thank you for your attendance, and we'll leave it there.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Ronnie.